Very small, but you got it.
How is that so tiny? Why did it go so small?
It's doing the full resolution, but once you make it full screen, it should.
Wow, but look at the letters up top.
Yeah, it's picked up the full resolution screen.
Okay, all right. Yay, okay. We start 10:15, right? Is that the right time?
Yes.
Huh? Just in time. I got 45 seconds to have more coffee. 30, maybe it's a minute 30. I am. Satan has a sense of humor. Haven't been sick in I don't know how long other than COVID, and of course this week I have to get a cold. So my voice is all croaky. I'm so glad that there are some men in the room. It's good, because we need to convince the men as well, not just the ladies.
I'm convinced.
You're convinced? What are you doing here? Should we wait a little longer?
Yeah, let's go.
Let's go for it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll introduce myself first. My name's Janine McNally. My background is I was a high school teacher in math way back, a long time ago. And then from there, and I was involved in youth ministry at the time. But I felt a sense of call and I always wanted to learn. So I went to a Bible college in Australia for 3 years. And then I weirdly wanted to learn Hebrew, and they didn't teach Hebrew in any schools in Australia, so I had to come to America. So I went to Dallas Seminary, and that's where I met my husband. And once we were married, we ended up in church planting. We planted a church for 10 years, and then it was a larger church. During our church planting days, I discovered a gift of administration that I didn't know I had, because there was no one else to set up the systems of the ministries, because he was the people, he would preach and do the people stuff, and I set up all the background ministries. So I found myself doing that, but at the same time I gained a real passion for evangelism. I did not have a gift of evangelism, and he did. And as we were reaching people, I got so excited about seeing people come to Christ. That gave me a passion for that. And then I was involved in women's ministry, and as a pastor's wife, of course. And then we moved to Colorado, and he retired. And unbeknownst to me, God had more things that he wanted me to do. And I found myself as in a position of being a children's director in a church. Now, you have to understand that I was a high school math teacher. I like them when they can hear and understand what you say. I don't like having to say things 15 different ways for them to catch on. And I told them in the interview, don't expect to see me on the carpet talking to these little guys. I said, I'd kill them. You know, I'd be so frustrated. I said, but my gifting will be, and what I will want to do is to recruit, train, and release them, people who are good on the carpet, to doing the work of the children's ministry. So they hired me, even though I told them I wasn't a real fan of little children. During my time as a children's director, I became a fan of children, and my passion didn't leave evangelism, but it went to children's ministry. And since then, I stepped out this time last year. I went home from our FGA conference and resigned my children's director position, even though I loved it. I just felt like I needed to. And then I came back and started to produce resources for children's ministry from a grace perspective. I felt like I'd used most of my time editing things that we bought, and you don't have time for that. I was so busy as a children's director. I was just running the whole time. So I turned into one of those people with weird hats. Things, you know, you do crazy things when you're in children's ministry. That's our youngest daughter. She made the hats for us. It was crazy hat night. I felt very out of my element, but we did it anyway. So I felt that in the midst of everything that goes on in a church with church politics and everything, and I just gained such a passion for children's ministry, and these are the reasons why. Most of you will probably know the gist of what I'm about to talk about really quickly about the statistics. The International Bible Society said that 83% of all Christians trust Christ between 4 and 14. How many in the room here have trusted Christ around those ages? Look around. Most people, there's some that didn't. I call that miraculous. After that age, some of you probably in teenagers. I spoke to someone yesterday who was 21. I think that's, God working, obviously. But children's ministry talk about the 414 window. Like missions is at the 440 or the 40. What's that mission? 4010, 1040 window? 1040. We talk in children's ministry about the 414 window. Here's another survey that talks about 2/3 of Christians came to faith before 18, 43 before the age of 12, and less than a quarter came to Christ after 21. And Barna research, they're a big group. At least half trusted Christ between 3 and 12. So obviously, this is a super high receptivity time. George Barna says more often than not, what a person decides about truth, sin, forgiveness, and eternal consequences during their preteen years, so that's like 3rd to 5th grade, is the same perspective they carry with them to their grave. So if we don't catch them at that time, what are they believing? Social scientists have known for years that the moral foundations of children is generally determined by the time they reach age 9. And anyone who wishes to have a significant influence on a person's moral and spiritual foundations had better exert that influence while they're open-minded and impressionable. I don't know if you've heard the quote, in the race to a child's heart, the first one there wins. I read a book. I just finished writing a book about children's ministry, but in my research, I read other books, and Valerie Bell wrote a book that she published through Awana called Resilient. And she talks in there a story about a conversation that she had with 2 Awana missionaries from Africa. And they said, do you know what the Muslims are doing in Africa? And she said, I don't know. And she said, they're building mosques and schools with all the money from the Middle East, and any child can get a free education. The catch is that they have to attend the mosque as well as the school. So in a poor country like that, what poor parent would deny their child an education? So what do? They send them to the mosque as well, and they are trained as Muslims, and they know they're recruiting for the future. They are getting into the hearts and minds of these little kids, trading it with an education, whatever guise necessary, so that they get these kids when they're little and young. Leith Anderson, the previous top factors, this is interesting, previous top factors that families used to consider when choosing a church were the location, the pastor, and the denomination. Now they are location, pastor, and children's ministry. They want their children in church. The parents are desperate. Most churches, and this was probably one of my favorite quotes, most churches and faith communities pour the bulk of their resources into trying to affect the lives of adults, and they're so often disappointed to find the return on the investment minimal at best. Their fundamental beliefs and behaviors were formed years ago, and they're mostly too ingrained to change. Yet the churches still pour most of their money and their resources into adult ministry. Now, is that bad to reach adults? Of course not. But children's ministry, I was just looking at a post on Facebook pages. There are a couple of Facebook pages for children's directors that have 25 to 26,000 directors on them. And so you get a lot of really interesting questions and answers from that Facebook page. But one question someone posed is, what's your budget? What do you get for a budget? And she said, we have 20 children, and our budget is $2,200 a year. That is pitiful. Another person said $200 a month. Another one, and they went down the columns. Now, when I was in ministry, our church was a fairly wealthy church. I can't remember what the full budget was. million?
Well, 3/4, 700,
3/4, 700, yeah, it's a pretty wealthy church, about 500 people. When I started, we had about 20 kids. When I left, we probably had about 120 kids between Sundays and midweek. And all of their families, obviously, of every child. My responsibility was the families as well. Plus, I had about 80 volunteers. So if you think through those numbers, 120 kids, the parents of those 120 kids, and then all the volunteers, that's a big group of people. And my budget was $11,000 a year. Now, that sounds better than 2,200, but you try to figure out how to do all your curriculum, all your resources. We did a fall festival, we did an Easter festival, your Christmas stuff. It goes very quickly. And my point is, we're investing so little in children's ministry, and I don't get it. I feel like people haven't caught on that this is the time to reach them. So yes, biblical mandate. Again, this is what you'll know. So we're going to just scoot through it really quickly. These words I've commanded, you shall teach them diligently to your children. Teach them to your children and your grandchildren. We just found out today, well, we already knew we were having twin grandbabies, and this is a secret no one's allowed to know. So don't tell anybody, but we found out this morning that they're boys. So we're excited. They're due, probably going to be born in mid-March. Don't tell her I told anybody. They're going to announce it probably tomorrow, she said, but you guys don't know who they are anyway, so that's fine. Yeah, so as grandchildren, who has grandchildren? Yes, you have a responsibility too, not just to spoil them, not just to pray for them, but to be intimately involved in their spiritual instruction. I went to a seminar. I was at a conference last week, probably the largest children's ministry conference in the nation. There's 2,500 attendees. And I did that last year, and I went to a session on grandchildren or grandparents. And something stuck in my head from what he talked about was every time his grandchildren came over, from the time they were born, little tackers, they would come in the door, he would take them and he would pray for them. And he did that every single time. So by the time they got to be teenagers, they knew that Grandpa was going to pray for them as soon as they came in the door. And they started saying, Grandpa, would you also pray for my friend? So-and-so, they're going through this. And it wasn't weird because they had been doing it the whole time. I'm hoping that we do something like that with our grandbabies.
What was the name of that children's ministry conference?
MegaCon.
Mega.
Con.
Mega, MEGACON.
Yes, and it's being renamed next year for the first time to Kids Matter. Kids Matter with a Z. Yeah, that's one of the Facebook pages. I love KidMin Community. It's got, I think it's up to 26,000 people in it right now. I learned so much from going to that one, and Children's Pastors Only, I think it was called. Those two Facebook pages. Boy, what a resource. And it was like networking in your living room. It was great. This is the problem right here. We're losing them. Among young adults, 18 to 29, the dropout rate is 64%. That's nearly 2/3 among a cross-section of millennials and Gen Z who had a Christian background and then at least for a season bowed out of the church. In their absence, the percentages of atheists, agnostics, and knowns are on the rise. If you've done any reading at all, you'll have heard the term knowns. I had not known what it was until fairly recently when I was working on my book. Knowns stand for no religion. So they are choosing to not believe, not wanting anything to do with, and saying they have absolutely no religion anymore. The issue is that they're saying here 18 to 29. The issue is that age is getting lower. So kids are now leaving in middle school. Why? They're busy. They've got sports. Mom, do I have to go to church? It's boring, blah, blah, blah. And the age is getting less and less. And that, I don't know about you, but I am not willing to lose an entire generation. What you see is a lot of sporadic attendance. So the regulars become, instead of attending 3 out of 4, now they're attending 2 out of 4 Sundays. Then you've got children from split families, and they can only come every other week. And so now they're only coming once a month. So they're catching snippets, but they're not getting any continuity at all in their lessons. A lot of families are church hopping. I don't know if you've seen this. What do they hop for? Best activity that's going over here. We'll go to the best one over here. We'll attend this VBS, then this one, then this one, and this one. So their parents are looking for a way to hand them off, and they church hop between all of the good experiences, and they're not catching any consistency at all. If we want to reach them, we have got to understand them. How many of you heard the term Generation Alpha? Anyone? A couple? Where'd you hear it from me? I didn't know what it was. I saw it in a footnote when I was researching for a class I'm going to be teaching at Grace School of Theology. And I'm like, Generation Alpha? Who's Generation Alpha? Well, you will have heard of millennials, right? And you've probably heard of Gen Z. Well, Gen Z is at the end of the alphabet. So a guy in Australia by the name of Mark McCrindle, decided we needed a new name for this generation. They are born, normally generations are about 15 years long. The numbers will be a little bit different depending on what you read, but Generation Alpha is about 2010 to 2024. What are the ages of the kids we're working with in children's ministry right now? 2010 to 2022. The youngest are yet to be born. Our twin boys are going to be alphas. What are they like? Do we know the difference? Think about it for a second. It's the first generation ever to be born in the 21st century, completely. It's the first generation that will never know anything but technology. So I talked to my kids. One of them's a Gen Z and the other's a millennials. And I said, you know, when did you first get a phone? I mean, I knew this, but I wanted to hear from them. When did you first get into technology? And it was basically when they were teenagers, and they needed it for school. Social media wasn't really around for our oldest until they were almost out of school. But this generation now are completely immersed. Look at a restaurant and what the parents do when they're trying to eat their dinner, shove an iPad into their hands. And these little 2-year-olds are flipping all through, and they know exactly how to play that game. It's like it's a natural DNA thing. I don't know. They are not afraid to experiment on their devices. They are also called the glass generation, is another term you'll hear, because they've got devices in their hands all the time. Is that wrong? Interesting question. So this is what they're saying about church. They're saying church is no longer relevant. I don't need it. They've become disillusioned in the church. Why? You hear the scandals, the politics, the splits in the church. They don't like that at all, and they are quick to spot it. And then the worst thing is they no longer believe in God. Oh my gosh, isn't that horrible? So we need to say, why are we not considered relevant? Why is children's ministry not relevant anymore? What do we need to do to make it relevant? It says 1 in 4 practicing Christian millennials believe the church is irrelevant. That's the same number as non-Christians. They think the church is irrelevant. 57% of church adults and 45% of practicing Christians say they know people who are tired of the same old church services. And 40% say they leave disappointed half the time. Why? We have the word of God. It's life. Why are they saying that about it? Oh, my goodness. We can say, no, we're relevant. And we can fight their arguments, but that's not going to help at all. We have to hear, why do they think that? And I believe the reason is we're not connecting what we're teaching to reality, the world that they're living in now. They're not, it's just not, we're not giving them any connection. And I think you've probably heard that perception is reality. Our entire culture outside of the church is indoctrinating our children with their secular worldviews, and our churches are perceived to be irrelevant. Perception is reality. If they say it's irrelevant, then it's irrelevant to their lives. So what do we do? What are we going to do to change our children's ministry and even our youth ministry to overcome that? My suggestion is we need to start answering the hard questions. And oh my goodness, there are so many hard questions. Look at our world. Oh my gosh. Used to be that marriage was a man and woman. Now heaven only knows what it is. It used to be that boy and girl were boy and a girl. I said to my daughter, our youngest is at Colorado Christian University. She's going to graduate in May. And she tells a story. She goes, Mom, do you remember so-and-so? We had to take her to the hospital last night because she was talking about suicide. Mom, so-and-so, what do I say to them? They're cutting themselves. Mom, so-and-so is really struggling with anxiety. They don't even want to get out of bed. I'm like, Jamie, can you find any normal friends? You know? She goes, Mom, they're all like this. Everybody is struggling. I said, why? She goes, well, look at the world. What do you think? This is what we're growing up in. It's a disaster. And the parents are feeling the same thing. They're like, I don't know what to do. You know, help me know what I should be doing to help my kids. We need to connect to reality. And so my suggestion is, instead of just teaching the story of Noah, talk about how he probably felt when the entire community was laughing at him and, you know, verbally abusing him, or worse. You know, the kids have social media and there's bullying going on all the time. Well, that's a perfect story to connect it to their reality and make it relevant. I think probably that teachers are struggling to know how to answer, yes.
So, like from millennials' perspective, I think a lot of times the churches went bad because we don't know how to answer the hard questions from a philosophical standpoint. If God created everything, who created God? Stuff like that. Do you find the same thing with this, obviously the older end of this generation alpha, the same type of hard questions, or is it more relating to their emotional side? Or is it more still this theological, philosophical?
I think it's both. I think there are biblical issues and I think there are world emotional issues. And the problem with waiting until they're teenagers is, remember the statistics, they decide really early on. Now, that doesn't mean God can't work in their lives as teenagers. But at a 3rd through 5th grader, if you look at a brain map of a preschooler, it's very similar to the brain of a preteen. And what it says is at preschool, they're getting ready to learn language and all the things they start to learn in preschool. At preteen, it's the same thing. They're getting ready for adulthood. It's the only 2 times when the brains look the same, and makes preteens incredibly receptive. It's also a time for preteens when they do what's called cognitive pruning. They say, you know what? I don't need that. It's not relevant. I don't need this. It's not relevant. And they start to prune things out of their brain, almost like they can't fit anything else in. So they've got to get rid of some things, and then they head off into teens and adulthood. And I feel like we have to start at that age group, at an age-appropriate content, teaching things like apologetics and teaching things like emotional and mental issues, and help them understand about our crazy world. You know, what do? Mary turned into Mark this week in school. How do I handle that? And I don't think the church is answering those questions.
Yeah, a good one. I'm sure you've heard of Cold Case Christianity. Maybe. So they have a children's version. We've done it with our daughter, and she's in that alpha, and so it's really good at describing all the apologetics at their level. And then Mama Bear Apologetics does that for the parent. But
right.
Yeah. But anyway, that was a good book to my husband and I went through with her.
I'm trying. I feel like with Grace for Kids, I feel like I have so many different things I want to do, and it's Grace for Kids is just me. There's at the conference last week, people were saying, so where are you located? I said, well, I'm living in Florida. Well, where is Grace for Kids stationed? Where I live. And, you know, I talk to people who have ministries and they have this team of people. I'm like, I would kill for that, because I have so many things I want to do. And one of them is to start having simple, biblical, topical lessons for teachers, so that if Joe says, what do I do about Mary and Mark, they can go to the website and see this is what I could do with the class right now, because we need to address some of these questions. I've just got so much on, not that I'm doing my doctorate. I mean, I'm just going crazy with everything, but yeah, I feel like we need to start answering those hard questions. Current events, mental health, depression, anxiety, bullying, loneliness, social media, racial inequality, suicide, self-harm, school shootings, oh my goodness, politics, gender identity and sexuality and inequality and abortion, all those, they see that stuff and online. We need to answer it.
Yeah, two questions that I always ask as a journalist, writing a column and having written feature stories about Christ making a difference in people's lives. So what and who cares?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to be relevant. You
Yes.
have to relate it to some problem that people are having.
Yeah.
Or else
Yeah.
it's just, it just goes over their head.
Yeah, and okay, so the church may not be equipped to do that, so bring in some experts, Some churches will have small groups for kids where they just, especially in that preteen group, where they just sit and talk. So what happened this week? What are some of the struggles you guys are talking about? Rather than maybe even going through the curriculum.
Right.
Maybe this is more important. Curriculums are not covering these. The closest thing is answers to Genesis with biblical apologetics, but they're not covering the moral things. And I think, honestly, that kids are worrying about that even more. COVID really affected kids, especially Generation Z. They're now known as the most anxious generation ever. And we're still to find out what the fallout's going to be with Alpha. But you got to remember that the solution for Alpha during COVID was technology. Their school, their computer, their iPad became their educator. It became their babysitter when mom was busy doing things. Everything revolved around this. So to say we can just take that away is naive. We have to learn, how do we incorporate technology into our training of children? We can't compete against their amazing video games and stuff like that. So I'm not suggesting that the church needs to try to compete, but we need to understand who these kids are and not try to make them become millennials or who we are. They are a whole different, the jobs they're going to hold in the future will be things we've never even heard of. And they, are they addicted or are they experts?
Right.
It all depends on how you look at them and what perspective, but they're our kids and we have to work with them now. I'm like, I'm so desperately passionate about this, in case you can tell.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I'm watching this happen because I'm raising my granddaughter now, and as a 13-year-old, I'm more engaged in seeing what's happening in the children's church. The one thing that I find is you cannot teach them the way we were taught.
Right.
Okay. I know me, when I was raised, and you asked the question, I was born and raised in church and whatever else, and we were taught, sit still, don't do this, go to church, whatever. You can't do that with them anymore.
Yeah.
And there is a level of, I do as I say, that kind of stuff. It doesn't work anymore. I'm not laughing, haha, but she's sitting and she's on her phone right now. But, and how do we balance that in, the relevance and whatever else? And they're saying, well, oh, put your phone down. Okay, but you're not providing the relevance or the things that they can really engage with.
I've got so many answers, and
I'm sorry.
I wrote them in my book,
sorry,
but they only gave me 45 minutes.
Right.
So I have a whole chapter on how they learn, how they learn differently. They learn by doing. They learn by interacting. And my big answer to everything is what they yearn for more than anything is relationships.
Yes.
So get your iPad out and sit down with them and watch the game they're playing. Try to interact with them. Like if you said, Jimmy, do you want to play a game with me on the floor? Most children will not choose their phone At that
Right.
point, they will want to sit with you and play.
Mhm.
They want that interaction, and this is the guilty part, we're so busy on our phones that we're like, go ahead and play your game over there. We need to be interacting with them on the floor with little
Whatever,
kids,
yeah.
not strangling them. But
Even though
but
we want
yeah,
to strangle them.
relationships are key. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the other thing that Barna found out, actually, that a lot of parents have the attitude, we'll just drop our kids off at church.
Yes.
Yes.
But when the parents get involved, Bible study in the home and relating to their kids, that's what has the huge lasting impact.
Yes, and again, in my book, I talk about, it's all well and good for the church to say it's the family's responsibility to raise their kids. Look at the families.
Yeah,
Right.
Most of them are not capable, if they're even believers,
right.
if they're even together,
Right.
they are not, a lot of them are just not capable, and they don't know what to do, and they're screaming for help. They want the church's help. So we can't just say, oh, it's the family's
Right.
And
responsibility.
children's church should not be just a place for them to go play.
Correct. We need to take every opportunity.
Right.
They should not.
Not just babysitter.
Yeah, it's not a
Yes,
babysitter,
yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
So we need relevance. We need to restore trust, because a lot of them are saying, and all these quotes are in your notes, but disillusionment, hypocritical church scandals, they are like radio that they beam on, they see that, and it's everywhere. I don't know about you, but the church I just stepped out from, disaster. That's why I stepped out. What do we do? Practice what we preach. Very clearly, that's obvious, right? But these kids are looking at people. We need to try to direct them to the one who is the perfect example, and teach them that, what, it may be smelly on the ark with the animals, but it sure beats the heck out of being outside of the ark. So yes, the church is imperfect, and there will be smelly animals in there, but it's better than being outside of the church. Some really basic verses. People will know that you're my disciples if we have love for one another, that they may see your good works and see your, it's not what we tell them, it's what they see us doing. So obviously they need that. And then thirdly, we need to restore belief. Like I said before, knowns means no religion. They no longer believe either that God doesn't exist or he doesn't matter, is what they're saying. They are now the fastest growing group in the United States, and 78% of the knowns admit that they grew up in church. They have left, and they no longer believe. Oh, that freaks me out. It's terrible. More statistics, I will leave you to read them through, but they're horrible. 19% don't believe in God. They think the Bible is a book of fables, legends, and history. 58% that say there's more than one way to God. We've seen it in our kids. They haven't abandoned their faith, but you can hear their language, that it's much more acceptable. Swearing is not a big deal anymore. Our oldest daughter, when she was single, went out on a date with a guy. She went on a Christian dating app site, found a guy who was a worship leader at a big church in town, who on their first date said he had no problem with them living together before they got married, because it's better that way. You can learn about each other. A worship leader in church. I'm like, are you kidding me? So our entire culture, including secular schools, is aggressively teaching the apologetics of evolution and secular humanism. They teach our students how to define a humanistic worldview, and they model that worldview. The secularists are teaching our children how to defend their secular faith and connecting it to the real world. Unless the facts behind the Christian faith are clearly and convincingly communicated in a way that students can learn and remember, their faith will not stand the assault of doubt from the world. That's the problem. Out there, they're hearing the opposite, and it's being connected to their real world. And then they come to church and they learn about Noah. Noah is wonderful, don't get me wrong. But if we're not connecting it to their world, it becomes just a story. So how do we do it? We've got to reestablish absolute truth. So obviously you probably know that relativism, what's good for you, is fine. You can believe if you want. Faith is fine if it works for you. It just doesn't work for me. Truth is how you define it. If it feels good, do it. There's no right and wrong. There's no absolute standard. Somehow we have to redefine, reestablish that absolute truth. Situational ethics, that was a big deal, but what we need is an unchanging universal code of conduct, not just that everything is gray. How do we do that? I was reading a book and it was really good. It said, press them into a corner. So divorce is okay because they don't get along anymore. Really? What about if it's your parents? Well, so you start to press them into a corner. Life doesn't begin at conception. Well, what if you end up with a baby inside and it's just not, how will you feel then? Well, it doesn't matter about the death penalty. Okay, so your child gets murdered. How are you going to feel then? Because you see people changing their relativism when it becomes personal. Oh, well, I would want to, and you see people want the death penalty, even though they didn't believe in it, but it's their child. So you press them into a corner because everybody at the end somewhere, there's a limit to their relativism. When it becomes personal, well, hang on, no, well, maybe the death penalty is okay because, that was my child that was raped and abused and then murdered. So it talked about doing that. I thought that was a really good way of doing it. Yes.
Have you heard of the book Tactics by Greg Koukl?
I have not.
So I don't agree everything theologically that Stand to Reasons teaches. However, when they're dealing with stuff like that, backing them in their corner, getting people to break down their own walls and make it personal for them. It's a fascinating book to be able to reach and engage them so that they can make abortion, if you will, personal to them.
Yes.
To figure out they're living a contradictory belief.
Yes. Takes it from here and it puts it into their personal. That's exactly what it was like. I thought, boy, that is really good. I had not seen it that way. Second, teach them the why. Why do we believe this? Why do we think this? Give them the evidence for the existence of God and the resurrection, coming back to the apologetics idea. And then thirdly, help them to experience God. So when our youngest, I was in my full-time position as a kids director, we started a children's program midweek. It was brand new, never been done before, and we were getting it all set up, and she was intimately involved with helping me. She was, I think, 13 at the time. And she said, Mom, I'm praying for 9 girls in my group. Now, she was the assistant leader to the 3rd through 5th grade girls. And I said, oh, sweetie, I said, I'd be happy if we had a total of 20 kids show up. No, Mom, I want 9 girls in my group. She said, I just believe that God's going to give us 9 girls. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to see her disappointed. I mean, I believe God could do that, but, it's our first. I was working really hard to advertise and stuff. And about a week before, she had 4. I'm like, that's really great, sweetie. You can invest in the 4. No, Mom, I want 9. I'm like, but sweetheart, this is wonderful. A couple of days later, she was up to 7. The night we were starting, she had 7 girls in her group, the biggest group. The other groups were all smaller than 7. And I was so excited. And she was like, no, she was disappointed. Kids were starting to arrive. And I get a phone call. It's a mother on the phone. I had no idea who they were. She'd got my phone number off the website. She said, is it too late to bring my 2 kids? We heard about your program. I said, no, that'd be great. Guess what they were? 2 girls in 3rd through 5th grade. And Jamie was running around. She will never forget that. She prayed and God answered. That's what we need our kids to have. Personal experiences of God where they see Him working in their lives. You can't deny that. So what do? I think we need to share our personal struggles and our victories obviously on an age-appropriate level, and tell them and show them and let them see our excitement at God working in our life, and then challenge them to see it. If you're teaching a Sunday school class, bring the prayer requests, write them down in a notebook, and follow and see if God answers, and put the answer down and build a list of your kids' answers to prayer so that they can come back and look at the book and say, oh yeah, I remember that. That's what I think we need to do, restoring belief. So yes, we got to restore relevance, trust, and belief, and then providing quality materials. That's where I came in. Most outreach resources produced by children's curriculums and companies, they are abstract and ambiguous and theologically unsound. When I walked into that classroom and I heard that teacher botch the gospel, he was reading from the leader's guide in the curriculum. And I had been so busy getting everything going, I had not gone through the curriculum and found curriculum. It was like 12 volumes. And I went back to my office and I found the leader's guide. And sure enough, I'm like, oh my gosh. So that's when I started getting a gospel outline. I stole it from Larry Moyer. He gave me forgiveness yesterday for stealing his outline, good news, bad news. And I said, we had a training. And I said, this is what, from now on, if you come to the curriculum and there's the gospel, I don't care how good it is. I didn't argue about why it's wrong to say you've got to confess as well with your mouth as well as believe in your heart. I didn't want to go there. I said, we're going to stick with this. Romans 3:23, Romans 6:23, Romans 5:8, and John 3:16. No one has a problem with those verses. 4 verses, 4 points. You're going to divert from whatever the material is to this gospel outline and then go back. And I want every one of you to do it. So little Mary goes to Mrs. Elizabeth, then to Miss Julie, then to Mr. Ron, through the classes, and every year they're hearing the exact same thing over and over again, not getting inconsistent, even if they're good. So that's what we started to do. I made posters, I put them on the walls. So if the teachers forgot their outline, there it was. You can point them to the kids. 4 verses, 4 points. That's the gospel. I recently surveyed about 200 kids from 6 different churches. One of them was a Free Grace church. And we asked the question, how do you get to heaven? 10% said, because Jesus died for my sins. The rest either didn't know, or it was a version of being a good person, or because I believe in Jesus. Well, so do the demons. You got to believe more than just that. 10% only. And when the children's directors saw that, they're like, oh my gosh, I have more work to do. Yes, teach them the gospel, teach it over and over again. Kids have to have it consistent all the time for it to get in here to their brains. And then hopefully it doesn't get cognitively pruned when they get to 3rd through 5th grade.
Just a quick thought.
Yeah.
I'm the director of Christian education for our church. And,
Well, you are busy.
yes. Yes, ma'am. The thing is that I also teach the new members class. And when I ask that question, we got to sound a large number of adults
Yes.
that don't know.
Yes.
And even at a Free Grace church sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, because new members are coming in from all different walks. And so I believe that's the foundation for me to teach there, because if we don't start there, when they go into this class or this class and whatever else, and then their children go into another place. But I was shocked that that number, even at the adult level, was so high.
Yeah.
I mean, African American church, we believe that we got to confess with our mouths, and it's really, that's the only way to get to heaven, you know. And or the other one is if I accepted Christ today, but if I'm not baptized today, I'm going to hell.
Oh,
That's a big one. And so I'm loving this because it's the children that join the church do not come to the members class.
Right.
They don't.
Right.
They don't come to the members. It's the parents that come. And so now we got to make sure that the children
Yes.
are getting it at
Yeah.
home as well.
And I wish it went through the whole church, you
Me too.
know.
Well, yeah, that's my goal too.
That's the sort of thing I was getting from my teachers. The ABCs, you've all heard that
We got
one.
that
Ask
one.
Jesus into your heart. What does that mean? You know, is he going to come and live in here? One of the teachers came up after I taught my session. She goes, I've been messing up all this time. That's what I told them. She said, I've got to reprogram my brain so that I don't go so abstract, because the kids are concrete thinkers. They just don't know. So this was the outline. Bad news, good news. Made up bookmarks that are out there, posters. They're all on the website, so you can just download them and use them if you're interested. That's
On
where
your website.
Grace 4, I'm glad you asked. Grace 4, the number 4, I designed the logo so that you could see a cross in the 4, which is why I used the 4. And I wanted an S on the end of kids, but somebody else had already stolen it, so I had to stick with Z. So graceforkids.org. I don't know if I've got time to go through this. Part of what I did in my book, I did a big study on those verses where it talks about causing them to stumble and a millstone being hung around your neck if you mess up. I've never heard anyone talk about what qualifies as causing them to stumble, what qualifies as despising one of these little ones. This whole 2 chapters is really serious stuff. You know, a millstone around your neck, that's that, and thrown into the sea. They would have understood that as like capital punishment. Do not forbid them. How do we forbid them? So that's what I was thinking through. How do we forbid children from coming to Jesus? Could it be that we lose them because we don't understand them and we're not adjusting to who they are? One of the quotes I read, which I loved, was the biggest mistake we can make in children's ministry is to keep repeating the same programs we've been using for decades when we were successful and not changing them even though our audience changes. I saw someone yesterday bring in the remains of a Happy Meal from McDonald's. One of the chapters in my book is a new Happy Meal toy. I like the idea that Happy Meals, the ingredients of the food has not changed in forever. We bought them for our kids when they were 2 and 3 years old. What changes? The toy. And how does it change? It changes depending on the cultural interests of the children. Right now it's a car, maybe from the new Cars movie. Before that, it was probably something to do with Minions, or, you know, they changed the toy, but the ingredients of the meal stays the same. So we don't want to change our message, but our toys need to change, and we need to be attracting our kids based on their interests. Do we know what their interests are? Do we talk about, find out, what are they thinking? What are they doing during the week? What is it? Prioritize. Obviously, prioritize. I don't know, how many of you are actually involved actively in children's ministry right now? Are you busy like crazy? I did not stop. The other staff members taking out a volunteer to lunch today. I'm like, I wish I had time to take someone out to lunch. They're playing badminton in the worship hall. I'm like, I'm going backwards and forwards trying to prep for things. Think about it. Children's ministry represents the largest single group in a church usually. No other group for our church was singly as big. It's the greatest physical, social, emotional, and mental development time. So all different development ages. Requires the most specific volunteer training between nursery, preschool, the elementary years, and now preteen. The most diverse ministry environments. We've got playgrounds. We've got rooms that have colorful walls and posters and balloons hanging from the ceiling. And that changes every season because you want it to be nice and pretty and relevant. The greatest amount of teaching material, like I said, that 12 volumes was also for preschool as well. We had another 12 volumes, and it was just immense. The group with the greatest risk and vulnerability needed the safety and security measures in place. Represents the most spiritually impressionable group. That age group is the most precious part of a family's life. Don't you mess with my child. That's my kid. You gave him candy. He's not supposed to be eating candy. You got to give him something else. It's typically the most underfunded department in the church, usually with the lowest paid leadership position. I found out when I left that my pay, even though I worked as much as the other men, the youth pastor, the music pastor, the executive, my pay was about a third of what they got paid.
Wow.
Why?
Yeah.
Why am I worth a third? Now, I didn't do it for the money.
Right.
But when I found that out, I was like, I felt insulted. And this is a bad one. It's usually staffed by undertrained leaders. Most of them will admit they have no theological training. So even if they read something theologically wrong, it doesn't even click with them, nor do they have children's ministry training. And because of all those things, I felt very unappreciated. I was working for an audience of one, so I put my head down and I did my job, and I did it to the best of my ability. But back there in the back of my mind, I was like, I don't know. Don't assume. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen among those who have a heart for the lost is they don't see the children in their own church as lost. Every child, even the cute ones in our Sunday school, needs the gospel. Someone said on that Facebook page just recently, why do you do VBS? The kids we get all the time are just kids from different churches. They all church hop. And I posted, yes, but they need Jesus too. Just don't assume they're saved. Just because they come to church every Sunday, do not assume that they're saved. And if you're in children's ministry, I applaud you. Save a man and you save a unit. Save a boy and you save a multiplication table. Who was it that did that sermon? I meant to put that in there. The famous person who was asked after a revival meeting, how many conversions did you have? He said 4.5. And they said, oh, you say you had 4 adults and 1 child? He said, no, 4 children and 1 adult. He said, children have their whole lives ahead of them. And if you catch them when they're early, they'll make less mistakes and potentially have a whole life to live for Christ and multiply better. I am over time. Whew. Any questions?
Tell them where they can get your book.
It's not released yet. It's at the editors.
I think she means an ebook.
So the ebook, if you just sign up on our website, you'll get a free 25-page ebook about alpha children, and that's a very short overview of who they are. My other book is hopefully going to be released in the next few months. So it's going to be called When You See Fireflies, and it's about children's ministry. And it's not just for children's ministry leaders. There's stuff in there for parents and grandparents as well. But it's, to me, no one's writing about alphas. A lot of it is because they don't usually do it until they're older and you can see the characteristics form. But we can see what our world is like and who they are growing up. So let me pray and we can leave. Father, thanks so much for the opportunity to work with children while we may feel that they're being relegated to the back room of the church and out of the way. They are precious, and we need to know the best way to reach them before they become something other than what you created them for. We just thank you for the privilege, and I thank you for everyone in this room, and I pray that you would empower them and give them strength as they attempt to work with children or convince other people the importance of working with children. Just thank you for today in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you.
Oh, Jason.